have these rivers are going to have a certain characteristics. The primary characteristic that we try to differentiate between the rivers is Himalayan rivers as well as the peninsular rivers. So if you see the Himalayan rivers, they have origin in the Himalayas. If you look at the Ganges river system and the Yamuna river system, it has origin in the Manas Sarovar lake. If you have the Brahmaputra river system, if you have the Brahmaputra river system, it is going to have the origin somewhere in the Tibetan part. If you look at the Mahanadi or the Brahmani river system or the Godavari or the Krishna river system, it is going to have origin somewhere in the Western Ghats and then it goes towards the Bay of Bengal. So that means when you try to look at the river systems, they have the characteristics that are dependent upon their origin. If you try to look at the Brahmaputra river, which has origin in the Himalayas, the characteristic of that particular river is this. If you see the slope of the river is going to be different. If you see discharge of the river is going to be different. If you see bed material of the river, it is going to be different. If you see sediment carrying capacity of the river, it is going to be different. But if you try to look at the Godavari river, it is going to be different in terms of the slope. It is going to be different in terms of the discharge carrying capacity. It is going to be different in terms of the sediment that is basically carried by the river. So these two rivers are the one of the highest discharge carrying capacity rivers. But if you see, they have the different characteristics because of the origin of the river. If you see, let me ask you a random question. How much could be the discharge passing through the Godavari river now at this moment? You got it my point. How much be the discharge that is passing through the Godavari river at this particular point? Any guess? 1000 meter cube per second or 2000 meter cube per second or 3000 meter cube per second or 500 meter cube per second or 100 meter cube per second. Any guess? Let there be a weird guess. Let there be a random guess. How much be the discharge that is passing through the Godavari river at this moment? How much it could be? 500 meter cube per second. Right? Say for example, let us go a little bit up towards the northeast. So there is a Brahmaputra river that is flowing there. How much could be the discharge of the Brahmaputra river? 1000 meter cube per second. So 1500 meter cube per second. What do you think that there is a difference between the discharge that is carried by the Godavari river and the discharge that is carried by the Brahmaputra river? What do you think that made a difference for you to guess the values? One river is carrying some 500 meter cube per second, other river is carrying some 1500 meter cube per second. So what could be the difference in that case? Yes, mountains, right? If you ask me, yes, the guess for the Godavari river is correct. It could be something around 300 to 350 meter cube per second in this season at Rajahmundry. If you look at the Brahmaputra river, it is under the pre-monsoon phase. Say for example, if you see Godavari river, it doesn't receive rainfall during the month of March, April and May. But if you go to the northeast, it has a monsoon that comes before the monsoon, which we call it as a pre-monsoon, that occurs in the month of March, April and May. So that means the pre-monsoon is going to give the additional discharge to the river, right? So if you ask me how much is the discharge that is carried by the Brahmaputra river at this moment, it is going to be something around 7000 meter cube per second, 8000 meter cube per second, right? And the minimum discharge of the Brahmaputra river is some 4000 meter cube per second or the 5000 meter cube per second. If you look at the minimum discharge of the Godavari river, it is around 50 meter cube per second or the 100 meter cube per second. If you look at the tributaries of the Godavari river, there are 6 or 7 tributaries. But if you look at the tributaries of the Brahmaputra river, it is around 30 to 35 tributaries. Okay? If you look at the slope of the Brahmaputra river, it is different. If you look at the slope of the Godavari river, it is different. If you look at the bed material, what could be the size of the bed material that is there in the Godavari river? You may be knowing, right, that Godavari river flows over the river sand bed, right? What could be the size of the sand particle over which the Godavari river flows? Any guess? 1 mm, 2 mm, 3 mm, 4 mm, 5 mm, 10 mm, 1 centimeter, 2 centimeter. What could be the value? over which the river bed material, the Godavari river flows? Any guess?
Less than 4.75.
Less than 4.75 mm. Say for example, let us go to again northeast and see the Brahmaputra river. How much is the size of the bed material over which the river is going to flow? You got it what I am trying to say? I am just asking what is the size of the bed material over which the Brahmaputra river is basically flowing? Approximately. Any guess?
It's more than sand particles.
More than sand particle means size.
Pebbles like
Acha pebbles also. So the size of the Brahmaputra bed material is 0.16 mm. Very finer bed material, right? If you look at the size of the bed material of the Godavari river, it comes around 0.6 mm or 0.7 mm. So do you think will there be some difference when huge amount of the flow is flowing over the smaller size bed particles? What happens when huge amount of the flow, very high amount of the flow is going to flow over the river bed which is having a very finer bed particles? So what it is going to happen? Covering, erosion is going to happen, right? And if you see the bed and the bed material, bank material of the Brahmaputra or the bank material of the Godavari river, have you ever observed the banks of the Nagavali river or the Vamsadhara river or the Godavari river? Did you ever see the banks of these rivers?
yes, yes.
How do they look like? They look like stable or unstable? Unstable or stable? Unstable. So that means if I stand on that river bank, it is going to collapse. No, I'm just asking. Nagavali is stable. Then Vamsadhara should also be stable because they are of close to nearby. They may exhibit the similar characteristics. Same is the case if you look at the Godavari river, it has a stable river banks. But if you come to the Brahmaputra river, if you stand on the river bank, there is a high chance that the bank is going to collapse, right? So that means there is a weaker bank materials in the Brahmaputra river, and there are the stable bank materials that are present in the Godavari river. So that means there is a difference in slope of the river, there is a difference in origin of the river, there is a difference in discharge carrying capacity of the river, there is a difference in bed and bank material carrying capacity of the river. So that means if you try to see Himalayan rivers and the peninsular rivers, they have different characteristics in terms of the origin. What is the length of the Brahmaputra river? Any idea? 15 what? Unit. Without unit, anything it doesn't have a value, right? Yeah. So 15 what? Kilometers. What could be the length of the Brahmaputra river? 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers, 2,500 kilometers. Where 2,500 kilometers?
In the
Brahmaputra is a transboundary river. That means it traverses through different countries. It traverses through Tibet, it traverses through India, it traverses through Bangladesh, and then it meets Ganges and is called as a Pathan, Meghna, and then it goes to the Bay of Bengal. Brahmaputra river, it traverses 1650 kilometers across in Tibet region. In Arunachal Pradesh of India, it traverses some 300 kilometers. Assam region of India, it traverses some 600 kilometers, and another 330 kilometers it traverses into Bangladesh, and finally it goes. How much would be the length of the Godavari river? How much would be the length of the Godavari river? Can you Google it and tell me what is the length of the Godavari river from its origin to destination where one? Just Google it and tell me what is it? 1600 kilometers? No help of Google is required to cross-check, right? So that means if you see, there is a difference in the way the river flows in Himalayas and in the peninsula. So what I am trying to say is, different rivers are going to have the different characteristics. What are the problems that are associated with the Godavari river? Is there any problem that is associated with the Godavari river, or no problems at all? Problems associated means, as a society, if I stay next to the river, what are the problems that I am going to face? Floods, floods and waterlogging is one of the prominent issues that we have it with the Godavari river. But what about the Brahmaputra river? You hear Brahmaputra river and the northeast every year in use. Why? For floods, severe floods, right? And there is another problem called bank erosion. I just told you the banks of the Brahmaputra river are very weak that you stand on the bank material, it collapses, right? So that means bank erosion is another problem, right? And morphological changes. What is a morphological change means? Sometimes the river stays this side, sometimes the river goes that side. So the oscillation of the river year to year, that is also the another problem. So that means if you look at the Godavari river, floods alone is the problem. But if you look at the Brahmaputra river, floods, bank erosion, and morphological changes are the problems that are associated with it. So how do you understand this river? So let's say for example, if someone goes to the doctor with some cause, how do the doctor analyze this? You know, he just goes with some blood test, he goes with some urine examination, he goes with some vitals, so that he would come to the conclusion that these are the issues that are pertaining to this particular person, and it has to be rectified by giving certain medicine, right? Same is the case we diagnose the river. Say for example, if we have to study the river, we have to characterize the river, we have to diagnose the river, and understanding the characteristics of the river, then we actually go with a certain treatment to the river. That treatment we basically call it as a river training works. Okay. So what I will try to do is that I will take an example of Brahmaputra river in today's discussion, and then I will give you a brief knowledge on how do we train the river, how do we characterize the river, how do we diagnose the river, and what are the problems that are associated with this river. All those aspects we try to understand, right? If you see the satellite image that you are seeing here is the Brahmaputra river, which is basically Indian portion of the Brahmaputra. That means it is traveling some 300 kilometers in Arunachal Pradesh and some 600 kilometers in Assam before it is actually going to the Bangladesh part. Okay. If you see the topography of the river, okay, what is relief? Relief is basically nothing but the minimum elevation of the catchment to the maximum elevation of the catchment, right? So this particular river has a maximum elevation of 8,000 meters, okay, and the minimum elevation is 0 near Bay of Bengal. So that means there is a 8,000 meter relief in this particular catchment. So that means the water the rainfall that is falling somewhere at 8,000 meters high is going to travel through this entire river, and it is going to reach the Bay of Bengal. So if you look at the topography of this particular river, there are some catchments, there are some subcatchments which are very steep, there are some subcatchments which are mild. So this particular river basin has a diversified topography that generates runoff in the catchment at different speeds. Okay. If you look at the rainfall distribution, I just told you, if you look at the Godavari river basin, you receive the rainfall in the month of June, July, August and September. Right? If you look at the Brahmaputra river basin, it has a concept of pre-monsoon. So that means in the month of March, April, May, it receives the rainfall. June, July, August and September, October also it receives the rainfall. So that means over 8 months duration of the rainfall is basically there. And if you see in this particular region, you may see the rainfall spell maybe for 3 days or 4 days. After that for 15 days you don't see the rainfall. Again you may see the rainfall for 2 days or 3 days. Again you don't see the rainfall. But it is not like that in the case of the Brahmaputra river catchment. 1 week there will be a spell of rainfall. 2-3 days there will be a gap. Again another week there is a spell of rainfall. So that means the spell of the rainfall is more and quite frequent in the case of the Brahmaputra river catchment. And that particular rainfall starts in the month of the March and it goes up to October. What happens if too much of rainfall is basically happening inside the catchment? What happens? If so much rainfall is happening to the catchment, what happens? More runoff is going to be generated. Where the runoff is going to eventually reach? It is going to reach the single drainage system, that is Brahmaputra. So that means more runoff that got generated because of the excess rainfall that is happening over the catchment. It traverses through 35 tributaries of the catchment and it is going to reach the river at a different points. Right? So that means topography wise it is complex, rainfall distribution wise it is complex. Right? And now if you look at the discharge variability, what is the maximum reported discharge of the Godavari river? Any idea? Maximum reported discharge of the Godavari river? 1500? 1500? Unit is very important. Without unit it has no value. How much? Q6 or Qmax? What is the average monsoonal discharge of the Godavari river? How much it could be? Average monsoonal discharge. Any idea? Any guess? 200 to 500 unit meter cube per second. Average monsoon discharge of the Godavari river is something around 8,000 meter cube per second. And maximum discharge it can goes up to 12,000 or 13,000, 14,000 meter cube per second. But if you come to Brahmaputra river, average monsoonal discharge is 20,000 meter cube per second. And it can go to a maximum discharge of 40,000 meter cube per second, 45,000 meter cube per second. In 1972, a huge flood reported in the Brahmaputra river, where the discharge has gone up to 70,000 meter cube per second. So that means if you try to see, the discharge variability of the Brahmaputra river is very high as compared to the other rivers. What is the minimum discharge of the Godavari river? 50 meter cube per second to 100 meter cube per second. But if you look at the minimum discharge of the Brahmaputra river, it is 5,000 meter cube per second. So that means how many times more than 100 times more than the minimum discharge of the Godavari river. So that means if you look at the discharge variability, it starts from 5,000 meter cube per second in the low flow season. It goes up to 40,000 meter cube per second, which is a huge variability in discharge. How many floods are usually seen in the Godavari river during the monsoon season from June to October? How many times you hear the floods? Once or twice? Maximum thrice. Sometimes you get a flood in the month of August. Sometimes you get flood in the month of October, right? But when it comes to Brahmaputra river, on an average, 9 floods are seen in each monsoon season. 9 floods means one flood comes in between in the March 15th around. Again in the April 1st week, another flood. April 3rd week, another flood. So that means the number of flood waves that reach the river is almost 7 to 9 during the monsoon. What happens if more flood waves are coming? What happens? Let the flood wave come, pass through the river, and it goes. What happens? What is the problem that you have if more flood waves are passing through the river?
Banks got erosion.
Bank erosion.
Soil
Next.
sediments carry on.
Sediments
Carry.
going to carry off, and what other issues? People. What happens during the flood? The river rises above its bank, right? So that means the river is going to rise above its bank, and it is going to reach onto the floodplains, and then it is going to reach to the nearby towns and the villages. What happens when the river water reaches onto the floodplains or it reaches onto the towns or villages? What happens? Water resistance. Whether the flow resistance of the river is more inside the river or on the floodplains or on the towns and villages, where the river is free and easy to move. Floodplains. You got it, my question? Now the river is flowing within the river. It moves with a certain velocity. If the same river comes over to the floodplain, moves into the towns and villages, whether the velocity of the river is going to be more or velocity of the river is going to be less? Less or more? More or less? More. Why more? Less resistance. Why? I have buildings. Whether it is easy for me to move like this or whether it is easy for me to move through this path. Because I have the buildings, I have the trees, I have the water bodies, more features that are present over the floodplains and the towns and villages. But if I see within the river, I don't have anything. I just have the riverbed and over which I am flowing. So that way, more resistance is going to be there on the floodplains. What happens if the more resistance is there? Velocity is going to be decreased. What happens when the velocity is going to be decreased? The sediments that are present within the river, they get deposited. Why? During the flooding season, if you see, the water in the river is not just water. It is a water plus sediment. So that flow we basically call it as a sediment laden flow. So that means when the sediment laden flow comes over to the floodplains, and when its velocity is reduced, all the sediments that are present inside the water, they get settled. Okay? How much is the usual height of the settlement of that sediment? Say for example, if the flood waters of the Brahmaputra are reaching over the floodplains, okay, towns, villages, okay, its velocity gets reduced, sediment got deposited. How much is the depth of deposition approximately? 10 centimeters, 20 centimeters, or how much? Any guess? You are understanding, right? What I am trying to put it? Yeah. How much would be the depth of deposition? 10 centimeters? You guess it. I told you at the beginning itself, you don't know what I am talking about. Right? So you are open to guess any number. Yeah. You guess it. How much would 30 centimeter depth? Each flood wave brings a deposition of 1 meter. Okay? And it is a very, very fine sediment. Bankamatti kind. Right? Very fine sediment. So if 9 flood waves are coming to the river, if 9 times the river is crossing onto the floodplains, towns and villages, if 9 times the sediment deposition is happening, how is it going to be the condition of the people living there? How it is going to be the condition of the livestock and the agricultural fields that are going to be there? So is that an issue? So that is going to be a big issue. So that is a problem. That is one of the major problems that are associated with the river and people. Okay. Do you know the meandering and braiding? What is meandering? Meandering means the river is flowing in a curvaceous path in a single channel. Braiding means the river is flowing in a multiple paths. So that means the river is flowing here straight. It takes 2 branches. One branch goes this way, another branch goes this way. Again, somewhere in the down, it joins together and reaches. Right? So if you look at the Brahmaputra river, it is a multi-thread river. If you look at the Godavari river, it is a single thread river. Okay? Multiple thread means how many threads the river is going to divide into. You got it, my question? Like I told you, one river is bifurcating into 2. That means 2 threads. Okay? What about the Brahmaputra river? How many threads it can go? I mean, whatever be the number that comes to your mind to the Brahmaputra river, make sure that number is a high number. A hint that I can give it to you. At some locations, the river bifurcates into 20 threads. 20 threads. So now you guess what could be the width of the Brahmaputra river? You are getting it what I am trying to say? When the river divided into multiple threads, when I have more space, right? If I have more space, I will go that side, I will go to that corner, I will go to this corner. If I have only this space, I will not go anywhere, I will go this way. So now you told the river is going into the 20 threads. When the river is going into the 20 threads, it means river has a freedom to move towards this and river has a freedom to move towards this. So what is that freedom I am asking? How much is the width that is available with the river to expand into the 20 threads? 2 to 3 kilometers is the width of the Godavari river at Rajahmundry, 4.1 kilometers. We are talking about the Brahmaputra river. How much would be the width? 5 kilometers. Any more guess? 10 kilometers. Any more guess? Little bit higher. Okay. How much? 100 kilometers is it becomes too vague actually. 30 kilometers, 15 kilometers. So let me tell you. Any river if you take it, it doesn't flow with a constant width. Some locations it may have less width, some locations it may have the more width. Say now for example if you look at the Brahmaputra river, at certain locations like Tezpur, Guwahati, Jogikopa, Dhubli, Nimati, there the river locations are very confined. 2 kilometers is the width of the river. Minimum width of the river is 2 kilometers. Okay? There are some locations where the river width goes up to 25 to 28 kilometers. Okay? Which is the longest bridge in India? Is it, I mean, what is the length of the Godavari River bridge that you see in Rajahmundry? Road cum rail bridge. What is the length of that bridge? 3.8 kilometers, right? Yes, there is one bridge called Bogibeel. You just check it. What is the length of the Bogibeel bridge? Ask Google. 4.8. Let's see what the Google is saying. What is the longest bridge on Brahmaputra river? Something like that. You search it. 4.94 kilometers. You just search it as the longest bridge in Assam. There is one road bridge in Sadia. Check it. How much?
9.1.
How much?
Bhupen Hazarika.
How much? So approximately 10 kilometers is the length of the bridge. So that means 10 kilometers is a very huge length, right? So that means if you see, yes, please. Topography wise, complex. Rainfall distribution wise, complex. Width wise, discharge wise, complex. Width wise, complex. Morphology wise, complex. Bank erosion wise, complex. Fluvial disasters wise, complex. If someone who tries to understand these complexities, they could able to treat the problems of the river easily, any river, right? So now what we try to do is that we try to little bit more dwell into this particular subject, right? Like I told you, floods, bank erosion, embankment breaching are the common problems that are associated with this thing. Like we have very high discharge that is passing through the river, so that way more floods are quite often. You have the weaker bank material. You look at the banks here, they are usually collapsing, right? You look at the banks here, they are usually collapsing. So that way bank erosion is another problem. What is embankment breaching? Did you ever heard embankment breaching? What is embankment breaching? What is embankment breaching? What is embankment? What is embankment? To retain the water. So that means embankment is a type of a wall that is constructed parallel to the river so as to control the flow of the river onto the floodplains. When the embankments are going to breach means collapse. When the embankments are going to collapse, any river embankments, when they are going to collapse, yes. Any other reasons? Seepage, yes. Any reasons where the embankment of the river is going to be collapsed or breached? When the embankment has served its purpose more than what it has to serve, right? What is the life of embankment approximately? 100 years?
20 to 30.
30 years?
20 to 30.
20 to 30 years. So usual life of the embankments that we design is for 50 years. Okay? Once the embankment is approaching the life, so that particular embankment may have resisted the angle of attack of the river through several years. right? So that means there is a chance that the embankment is going to collapse because it has experienced or it has resisted more floods in the past. So what happens when such kind of the embankment breaches? See, this is the location where you could see a breaching of embankment took place. So when the angle of attack of the river is towards this embankment got breached and entire area, low-lying areas surrounding this particular river got suffered. The characteristics of the river. You see, highest discharge is something around 72,000 cubics and the lowest discharge is 1757 cubics. And the number of flood waves are 3 to 5, but it goes up to 9. Lift is up to 3 meters height. If you look at the bank erosion, almost 1912 to 1996 overall 90 years, 2,000 square kilometers of the land is basically lost because of the erosion. And if you look at the embankment, 90% of the embankments they got expired due to frequent breachings. If you look at the earthquakes, there are many earthquakes that this particular region has experienced in the past. What is the problem? What actually earthquake does to a river? What actually earthquake does to the river? I tell this particular river is resting on the geodynamically restless region. So more frequent earthquakes are common. So what happens during the earthquake event to the river? What is the problem that is associated to this river because of the earthquake?
The surrounding soil behaves like water.
Surrounding soil behaves like a water, right? And during the earthquake, what is the most common problem that is seen in the mountainous regions? What is that? Landslides. Landslides are the biggest problems during the earthquake. What happens to that slided material? Where does it goes? It goes into the river. It goes into the river. Landslides accompanied by the high rainfall events during the earthquake events, they generated debris flow, right? The debris flow is basically a mixture of water plus huge sediment. So what happens when huge sediment goes to the river? It blocks the river, it clogs the river. What happens if it is clogged?
Discharge by decrease.
What happens if the deposition happens inside the river?
Discharge by decrease.
It raises the water level. What happens if the water level is raised? Floods are going to be again the issue. That means the carrying capacity of the river is going to be decreased. That is going to create a problems of the floods, right? So you see, these are some of the flood affected districts of the Assam. You see, this is a map of the Assam and this is the center through which the Brahmaputra river is going to flow. All the districts that are surrounded by the Brahmaputra river, they are prone to the floods. Okay? And this is one of the national park in Assam, which is Kaziranga National Park. What is it famous for, Kaziranga National Park? What is it famous for? Single horn rhino, right? So whether it is important to the national park to get flooded every year or it should not be flooded. You got my question? Whether flooding is necessary inside the national park or not? Why? Why not? Animals are going to be submerged. Flooding is a very important phenomenon in the national parks. Every year flood is necessary in the national park because flood brings a rich environment that is necessary for the animals. It brings nutrients, it brings rich sediments that are needed for the growth of the grasses, that are needed for growth of the forest environment that is needed for the animals, right? So the national park that is there next to the Brahmaputra river, it is also going to be flooded. And which is the largest river island in the world? What is river island? Do we have any river islands? stream? In Krishna river, do we have any river island? Do we have any river islands in Krishna river? So what is the necessity? I mean, which location in the world is having largest river island? Huh? Sundarbans, river island. Which locations in the world has largest river island? No. Again, I told you, right, whichever be the specific I ask, it should be related to the Brahmaputra. There is one river island called Majuli. Okay? Majuli is the largest river island in the world. Right? The area of this particular river island is 790 square kilometers once upon a time. Because of the frequent erosion of this particular island, now it has reached to 500 square kilometers of area. Okay. So Majuli is a district which is a river island as well. So that means if you try to see, floods are impacting the river erosion, floods are impacting the national parks. So these are the specific problems that are associated with the river system. If you look at the peak floods of the river, you see in this particular slide, you can see the peak flood of the river from 1900 to 2015. That means close to 120 meter of the river we are seeing here. Sometimes you see 46,000 meter cube per second, sometimes 50,000 meter cube per second, sometimes 56,000 meter cube per second, 58,000 meter cube per second. So that means the river has a capacity to hold up to 50,000 meter cube per second. If I have a capacity to take some load, that means I can take load up to the capacity, beyond which I collapse. Same is the case with the river as well. If the river is designed naturally to take up a flood carrying capacity of 50,000 cumecs, it easily carries 50,000 meter cube per second. If the more discharge is coming to the river, then it will flow onto the floodplains and it will give rise to a flood. What we are noticing it, the river carrying capacity up to 1950 is close to 50,000 meter cube per second. After 1950, the river carrying capacity is decreasing over time. Okay, what happened in 1950? There is a Assam earthquake of magnitude 8.9 earthquake. What that earthquake did? Earthquake generated huge amount of the sediments because of the landslides. What happened to all those sediments? All those sediments reached the Brahmaputra. Okay, and those sediments, followed by the major floods in the river, it deposited the sediments that are generated because of the earthquake throughout the river, and it reduced the carrying capacity of the river. Initially, the carrying capacity of the river was 50,000 meter cube per second. It got reduced to 38,000 meter cube per second. So that means there is a decrease in capacity of the river of close to 12,000 meter cube per second. So what happens if the 50,000 meter cube per second of the discharge comes to the river? 38,000 cumecs of the river, the river stores. Excess 12,000 cumecs it actually gives onto the floodplain. So to carry out some investigations, we have conducted the subsurface sonar investigation at one of the locations. Okay, subsurface sonar investigation is basically nothing but what is there beneath the river bed. Okay, we try to identify. What you can see, this is the water surface of the river. Okay, and this is the bed of the river. So how much is the depth of the river here? 22 meter is the depth of the river. So now what is the data that you are seeing beneath the bed? You are seeing the depositions that happened in the past. So that means this is one layer of deposition that happened inside the river. This is another layer of deposition that happened inside the river. Okay, up to here, the depth from the water surface was 60 meters. If you see 20 meters as a water depth, 40 meters of the sediment got deposited. Up to here, if it is 40 meters, 20-meter water depth is there, that means another 20 meter got deposited. So that means there are huge layers of the sediment deposited in the past inside the river bed, that is reducing the carrying capacity of the river. So you want break? You don't need it, right? My usual time is after 2 hours. Usually I take the break. But when you are getting bored in between, do let me know. Then I will. We can have a break. Right? Yeah. So if you see, there is 20 meters of deposition. There is 20 meters of deposition. Right? So that means 40 meters of the deposition that got occurred inside the river historically, maybe for 200 years, 300 years. So that is reducing the carrying capacity of the river. Once upon a time, the river has a carrying capacity of 1 lakh meter cube per second. After some time, the carrying capacity got reduced to 65,000 meter cube per second. Now the carrying capacity got reduced to 30,000 meter cube per second, which is one of the major problems of the depositions that happen inside the okay. Yes. So, yes. Yes. So now shall we? So why the river is depositing in this fashion? Almost, if you look at this particular slide, almost this much amount of the capacity of the river got lost because of the deposition, right? Why the deposition is happening? So what we did, Suresh is also part of this exercise along with me at IIT Guwahati. We have traveled to several locations along the river and we have identified the size of the sediments that are present inside the river. You see, these are the multiple locations that we have analyzed in the river. So we have collected the water samples, we have collected the sediment samples, and we have analyzed it in the lab. What we understood? The size of the sediment is 0.01 mm. It is varying up to 0.2 mm. So that means there are the sediments of 0.06 mm, 0.2 mm, 0.01 mm, 0.08 mm. That means very finer sediment particles are basically present inside the catchment that is actually more prone to the erosion. You have very high discharge that is coming to the river. Morphological changes. What is morphological change? Like I told you, morpho means shape. Logi means study. That means if you are studying the shape of the river, how it is changing with respect to time, then we basically call it as a river morphology. So what I am trying to do, I am trying to see here, let me go back to previous slides and then I will talk. You see, this is one of the tributary of the Brahmaputra. So this is Jiabarli River in 1991. This is Jiabarli River in 2021. So if you see these two, the same river in 1991 and the same river in 2021, if you look it like this, you don't find much difference in the shape of the river. But what we have done the overlaying analysis. What we have noticed, 1991, the river is towards this particular path. In 2021, the river is towards this particular path. So what happened to the course of the river? It got changed. The shifting course of the river is basically called as a evolution. Okay, so this is one of the morphological change that happened to this particular river system, right? You see here, this is one of the in 2018, this is the river bank. In 2019, this is the river bank. In 2020, this is the river bank, and in 2021, this is the river bank. What happened to river bank from the last 2018 to 2021? It got eroded. Okay, how much it got eroded? It got eroded at a rate of 300 meters year. That means within 1 year, 300 meters of the bank got shifted. From 2018 to 2019, 300 meters. From 2019 to 2020, 200 meters. From 2020 to 2021, it is again some 300 meters. So how much is the total length of the bank got eroded from 2018 to 2021? It is almost 800 meters. 0.8 kilometers of the land got eroded. Right? So this is also the morphological change. Why? What happens to this eroded material? It goes and deposits somewhere. That is going to cause a change in river morphology. Right? If you try to look at here, what is the difference that you could notice in this particular figure, in this particular figure? What is the difference that you could notice? Could you find any difference between this river and this? This is the same photograph. If you look at here, in this case, the hill rock is protruding into the river. If you look at this case, the hill rock is not protruding into the river. The river got shifted from the hill rock. Okay? What caused the river to shift? When the sediment got deposited here, the river is going to shift from here to here. So this is also the morphological change. That means shifting of the river is also one of the morphological change. You look at here, this is another morphological change that we could notice. Here if you see, the river is taking this particular path. Here what happened? The river left this particular path and it took this particular path. So this is, we call it as a cutoff. So that means this is the original path of the river. Because the river felt that river has to spend so much of energy to travel this long path, river made a cutoff from here to here. This cutoff we basically call it as a neck cutoff. Okay, so that means this is also another morphological change, right? So that means if you try to see neck cutoff, morphological shift, or the bank erosion shift channels, these all comes under part river morphology. What happens if the river? Let me ask you one question. Do you know the Kosi River? Kosi River. Kosi River, did you hear? Kosi River is basically a river that traverses in Bihar. What is the speciality of that river? You know it. That river is usually called as a sorrow of Bihar. Why it is called sorrow of Bihar? Because every year that particular region receives floods because of the Kosi River. Okay, huge depositions, sediment depositions, large scale inundation occurs. In addition to that, you know how much amount of the shift the river has undergone in the last 200 years? The river has shifted 150 kilometers towards the left 200 years. 150 kilometers means today the Nagavali is there here. Tomorrow, after 200 years, the Nagavali may be there somewhere near where? Visakhapatnam or somewhere. So that much of the shift that river has undergone in the last 200 years. Okay. So my point here to say is that the Brahmaputra river is one such kind of the river which experiences severe morphological changes. When do I call morphology as severe? If I change daily, if I change monthly, if I change every monsoon, that frequent changes we basically call it as a severe morphological dynamics. Okay. If you look at the shape of the Godavari river, once in 20 years it moves from there to there. That means it takes 20 years for the river to carry slow shift and goes there. But for Brahmaputra, it is just a matter of days, it shifts from here to there. So that kind of the change we basically call it as a severe morphological change. Okay? If you see 1940, the width of the river is 4 kilometers. but in 2000 the river width has gone up to 10-12 kilometers. How did the river width got increased? Because the floodplains are made up of the weak bank material that got eroded over a period of time, and the river expanded laterally and the width of the river got increased, right? And if you see this particular image, this is in February 2014, February 2015. Over a very short period of time, you could see there is a shift in river. You see, this is main channel of the river which is carrying largest discharge in Feb 2014. In Feb 2015, this has become the largest discharge carrying capacity of the river within of 1 year of time. So that means river got shifted from the north side towards the south side. If you look at in Feb 2015, only 2 sandbars are present. In fact, May 2015, within 3 months of time, 3 sandbars are displayed. So that means the change that is happening inside the river is frequent, and within a short period of time, there is a severe change that is basically happening in the river. Right. Yes. This is another imagery analysis that we have carried out. You see, this is in the month of May. This is in the river in the month of May. This is the same river in the month of November. How many months difference? May, June, July, August, September, October, November. 6 months difference. Within the 6 months, you see, I have overlaid this pattern of the river. Over this pattern of the river, I could see there is complete distortion in the change of the path of the river. So why the river is changing its path more frequently? Why? You have got basic knowledge of the river by now, right? Why the river path is changing more frequently? 1, discharge variability. Okay. 2, finer bank and the bed material. Okay. 3, weak bank erosion. 4, more number of the floods. 5, wide space for doing the morphological activity. So all of these factors are causing river to change more frequently. So we have done one analysis. In this analysis, we have tried to see braiding index. Braiding index is basically nothing but it quantifies how many number of channels that the river is basically having. If the river is having only one channel, braiding index is 0. If the river is having 2 channels, 3 channels, 4 channels, if the river bifurcates into 10 channels or the 20 channels, the braiding index is going to increase. So what we have noticed is that the braiding index is ranging from 15 and it is going up to some 3 or 4 inside the river. So that means from 1940s to 2010, when we have analyzed the braiding index of the river throughout its 900 kilometers, we could see there is a huge variability in the braiding of the river. If you look at the width of the river, it is also having the huge variability. What is clear is that once upon a time, before 1950s or 40s, the river width was 3 kilometers or 4 kilometers. Now the river width got increased to 12 kilometers over a period of some 50-60 years. Okay. Now I would like to show how the flood wave is going to be there. What is a flood wave? Now I will ask you a simple question. Say for example I have a 3-day rainfall event. Okay, 3-day rainfall event. Whether the intensity of the rainfall is going to be same over the 3 days or it is going to be varying with the time. That means, say for example, if I have a 3-day storm, okay, at the beginning of the storm, there can be one intensity. Mid of the storm, there can be one intensity. During the night time, there can be some intensity. Next day morning, there can be some intensity. So that means the intensity of the rainfall is going to change over the entire duration of the storm. That is clear, right? Right? So, if high intensity rainfall is falling over the catchment, okay, then high discharge is generated. Say for example for 2 minutes in this particular room, if the rainfall of intensity 20 mm per hour is occurring, there is some depth of the water that is going to come into this. Okay. For another 5 minutes, if there is an intensity of 1 mm per hour, the depth of the rainfall is going to be collected here is going to be different. So that means intensity of the storm and the depth of the rainfall that is falling over the ground, depth of the runoff that is falling over the ground is going to be different, right? So that is related to intensity. If you have high intensity short duration rainfall event, immediately very high depth of the rainfall is going to be collected. Right? If you have short intensity rainfalls that are happening over a duration of 3 hours or 4 hours, then the depth that is collected is going to be different. So that is the reason, because of the different intensities of the rainfall by which the rainfall falls over the catchment, the flooding inside the river is basically generated. You see, this is one flood wave. This is another flood wave. This is another flood wave. So that means during the high rainfall event, more flood is going to be generated. During the starting of the rainfall event, less flood is going to be generated. What happens after the rainfall event? After the rainfall event, runoff is going to be collected and that is going to reach the stream. Okay? Even after rainfall is stopped, runoff will still come to the river. How does it come? You got my question? You got it, my question? Rainfall is falling over the catchment. Runoff is recorded inside the river. Rainfall stopped over the catchment, but still runoff is going to come to the river. How? That means if the rainfall is 3 hour duration, and I get the runoff for 10 hour or 12 hour duration. You are getting it. Why? Because there is some amount of the base flow also that is going to come. There is some amount of the flow that is going to released after the rainfall event. So that is the reason, if you see, this is a huge flood hydrograph that we could see it, and this flood hydrograph is almost for 1 month period. Over a 1 month period, you can see a full flood hydrograph, right? Multiple rainfall events of multiple intensities occur. So you get a very big flood hydrograph that is passing through the region. And how that flood wave, say for example, this is the point where the flood wave got started. Flood wave, once it is generated, it moves downstream, right? As it moves downstream, the intensity of the flood is going to be decreased. You see, this is the peak of the flood at 1 kilometer. At 20 kilometers, the flood peak got decreased. At 100 kilometers, the flood peak got decreased. At 200 kilometers, the flood peak got decreased. As the flood is moving downstream, the intensity of the flood peak is going to be decreased. Why? As they move downstream, there may be storage ponds here, there may be wetlands here, there may be lakes here, there may be the soil that absorbs the water. So that means the loss of water happens as it moves from one location to another location, and the flood peak is also going to decrease. If you look at every flood peak, it is going to have the 3 levels. One is the warning level, another one is the danger level, another one is the high flood level. Okay? If the river is crossing the warning level, it means the flood wave got started inside the river. Right? What is this information? This is basically the satellite imagery data, and the 2 microwave satellite imagery data. Can you see some difference in these images? What is the difference that you could see it? here you can see some yellow color patches. 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 Right? So, what are these patches? Depositions. But yes. So, see, let me tell you in another way. Microwave satellite image has a capacity to get the nature of the surface of the river. If surface is more disturbed, okay, if the surface is more rough, some characteristics could be reflected in the satellite image. If the surface is smooth, some characteristics could be reflected in the satellite image. So that means I could see there are certain zones where the surface is rough that could be reflected here. Okay? What does the rough water surface indicates? If the water is calm, then surface is going to be smooth. You go to the lake, you go to the stagnant water body, water surface is going to be smooth. If you go to the sea, water surface is going to be fluctuating. If you throw a big rock inside the stagnant body, a wave is going to be generated, a disturbance is going to be generated, and the surface becomes oscillating and rough, right? So that means whenever there is a turbulence inside the river, what is turbulence? Turbulence is basically nothing but the chaos nature of the river. So that means velocity fluctuations of the river. That we basically call it as a turbulence. Whenever there is a turbulence inside the river, there is going to be a rough water surface. Whenever the rough water surface is present, that could be reflected here as in the microwave satellite image. What is the indication of this rough surface? That means turbulence is present. What means the turbulence is present? Turbulence is present means more velocity fluctuations are present. More velocity fluctuations means more erosions. More erosions means more sediment material is going to be generated. If more sediment material is going to be generated, sometime later it goes and deposits at some location. So that kind of the advanced features also we will be able to get from some of the satellite images. Okay. So like I told you, if a patient visits a doctor, he has to do some test to understand what is the problem that is associated with that particular person. Same is the case if we have to treat the problem that is associated with the river, we have to conduct some tests, right? So these are the equipment that could help me to carry out the test. Okay, this is acoustic Doppler current profiler. It will help me to identify the three-dimensional velocity distributions of the river. It could help me to get the information about the discharge distribution of the river. This is the echo sounder. It will give me information about the depth pattern inside the river. How much is the depth? Which are the areas that are having the larger depth? Which are the areas that are having the smaller depth? All information you get. This is a suspended sediment analyzer in the river. So this gives me how much amount of the sediment concentration, total sediment concentration that is present inside the river. So how much is the sediment concentration in the Godavari river at this moment? How much it could be? Whether the rainfall is happening? No. Say for example, if you go and use this particular suspended sediment analyzer, how much is the reading it should record? You got it, my question? Guess it. What is the unit in which you express the sediment concentration? Milligram per liter, right? Mg per liter, which is basically nothing but the ppm, right? Yeah. So how much will be the concentration of the sediment in the Godavari river at this moment? 10 milligram per liter, or 20 milligram per liter, or 100 milligram per liter, or 200 milligram per liter? How much? If more upstream rainfall is basically happening, more sediment is generated and the concentration is going to be there. But now there is no rainfall. Whatever be the runoff that you are seeing inside the river is contribution from the base flow, right? Base flow is a groundwater flow. So you are going to have the very less sediments inside the river, suspended sediments inside the river, say 10 milligram per liter or 20 milligram per liter. Same during the monsoon season, how much will be the concentration? 1000 milligram per liter, 2000 milligram per liter, depending upon how much amount of the upstream rainfall that happens. So that is the reason, if you see the Nagavali river now, it is clear water. If you see the Nagavali river in the month of June, July, August, you see muddy color water or the red color water, which is because of the increase in sediment concentration inside the rivers. Okay. So these are some of the equipments I use it for understanding the river vitals. Okay. And this is a survey vessel over which these equipments are basically mounted, and you get the information. Because you know this is a very large river, very wide river with so much high depth, 40-meter depth of the water, 50-meter depth of the water, huge discharge of 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 meters cube per second passing through the river. You cannot go on country boats to carry out the measurement. You should have survey vessels to carry out the measurement. I think we, myself, Suresh, we all have travels down these survey vessels for collecting the data. We used to stay in river for almost 10 days, 11 days to get the data inside. So this is the data. You see whether the surface is smooth or rough. Whether the surface of the water is smooth or rough. Rough. So it reflects in the microwave image that we have seen, right? So this is the data that is basically collected from the acoustic Doppler current profiler, which gives three-dimensional velocity distribution of the river. See, this is the velocity distribution of the river. Okay. So what is the usual velocity distribution inside the open channels? Parabolic velocity distribution or logarithmic velocity distribution. You may have learned in fundamental fluid mechanics, right? But you don't see such kind of the velocity distributions in the case of the natural rivers. You look at the river bed, how it is present here, irregular, right? You look at the river bed here, you look at the river bed here. This is the half of the river is basically under the low zone velocity, low velocity zone. So low velocity zone means sediment deposition is favorable here. Right? You see here, very high velocity is present. What is the range of velocity? Up to 2.7 meter per second. So all the characteristics of the river, you can able to get it when you use such kind of advanced measurements. You see, this is also the velocity distribution of the river. You see, this is one location where this velocity distribution is present. This is another location where this velocity distribution is present. We could also able to get the suspended sediment concentration of the river. You see here the suspended sediment concentration is very less, some 50 milligram per liter. But here the sediment concentration is up to 1800 milligram per liter. So that means within the river itself, there are the zones which are having lesser sediment concentration. There are the zones which are having higher sediment concentration. Just like a blood test report, when I analyze the data of the river, I could able to understand which are the zones of the river which are prone to erosion, which are the zones of the river which are prone to deposition just beforehand actually that event occurs. Okay. You see, this is a 4 kilometer length of the river. 4 kilometers length of the river. I told the river is going to have a multi-thread nature. This is one channel, this is second channel, this is third channel, this is fourth channel. The river is divided into 4 smaller channels. Okay. So do you need break? No? Yes? So 5 minutes of break can we have it? But I have still 20 is completed. Another 20 more slides are there for me. I will take some time. So 12, we will have some 5 minutes of break and then we will continue back. That should be okay? In the meantime, if you would like to discuss something.
మేడం దేం చేయాలి స్టాప్ చేయండి సార్.
మేడం పర్వాలేదు మేడం. అయ్యో పర్వాలేదు.
పర్వాలేదంటే పర్వాలేదు.